You go to webinar maybe. All right. I think it worked. Is everyone here?
Webinar.
Hello, guys. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello.
Sorry, we had some technical difficulties and it took a while for all of us to join. So thank you all. We're here today to discuss climate fiction, art, and futurism in the Global South. With me today is Renan, João, and Damilola. We're going to start out by trying to define what exactly the Global South is. So who would like to start?
I can start.
Go ahead.
So Global South, in my opinion, is a term that is far more political and historical than geographical. And it comprises all the places in the world that still suffer the consequences of colonization, enslavement, imperialism, and most recently, capitalism. And those are places that were heavily exploited and still are through sets of policies that benefit mostly the United States and Europe. So I think a Global South, or any other term that is used to define those places, has to be a term that has to have some weight. And terms that like third world or developing countries might sound derogatory and have a negative charge over it. But I think whatever the term is, it cannot be neutral. It has to have a political meaning behind it to expose why exactly are we separating this place from the US and Europe. And I think that the Global North needs to understand that many of their comforts and progress exist only because there is a Global South. So the Global North outsources whatever is seen as ugly or wrong to the Global South. So for example, we don't see Norway polluting its fjords, but we see Norway opening up companies that destroy the rivers in the Amazon. And we don't see a huge mass of workers without rights producing cell phones, t-shirts, computers in Germany. But we see it in China or Vietnam or Taiwan. So Global South is a term that also exists to show that new forms of colonization, imperialism, and enslavement still exist and need to be seen. And I think fiction and climate fiction in particular plays a huge part in making those things more visible. That's what I have to say about the term Global South.
I would agree. I think it's more of a political term and really isn't defined geographically. João, Damilola, is there anything you guys would like to add? Go ahead, João.
I don't have anything to add, actually. You know, I think I make Renan's words mine. You basically explained the whole concept, so that's a wrap. Of course, I agree that the Global South is more of a political term, right? Because, for example, if it was a geographic term, Australia would be part of the Global South, but we know that's not true. We consider, even if it's in the South, Australia is part of the developed world, right? So, and as Renan said, many of the comforts of the Global North are based on the exploitation of the Global South.
Damilola?
Okay, so I don't know why my video is not starting. It's saying the host has disabled it. I don't know if you can look into that. But just to add to what they've said, right?
I think now it would work. I'll turn on your camera if that's okay.
Okay, much better.
Yeah, all right.
So, yeah, so just like they said, I find the term quite demeaning to start with, right? Before now, it used to be called a third world states, right? So who are thought, or what, or can I say, who are those being regarded as the third world states, right? People who are less developed or developing in quote, right? People who have suffered political, crises, high rate of poverty, and all of that. So the global south is just is a contemporary word, right, used to mask what the third world nation is, right? Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the likes. It's just people saying these people are less developed, right? They're not where that you should be. Now the question is, why not help them to be where you want to be? But I was reading about the disparity between the global south and global north. And I found out that the global north are like the world powers. So rather than tag a state to be a global south state, right, why don't you just help them? So such words is what they used to bring down, Africa, Latin America, and the like. So like Renan said, it's a political term, okay, used to create a disparity basically between the rich and the poor.
So a couple of genres have developed coming out of the global south. Afrofuturism and Amazofuturism are two examples of that. What do you guys think defines these genres, and how are they different from each other? Is the difference simply regional, or is there more to it than that? Sorry, is my mic not working, or?
No, it is.
No, it's my bad.
Yeah.
If you'd like to start, João.
Yeah. Do you want to start, Damilola?
Just so the two terms are quite akin, right? They have a lot in common. For Afrofuturism, we are saying we want to set Africa as the centerpiece of the world, right? We have an history. We want people to know where we are coming from, right? We want to globalize our local products, right? In terms of speculative fiction, we want people to see that Africa is not just a place where it's a dump site, right? So to say, it's not a place where people are hungry, but we are fetched and all of that. We want to paint Africa as centerpiece of the world, right? Likewise with Amazofuturism, I think I read about it somewhere, and it seemed to describe the fact that they want to, the Amazon nations, the Brazilians, the Mexicans, and all of that, they also want to put their nations ahead. So this is something that we both have in common, right? Said, for so long, we have been marginalized, right? We have been submerged. We have been placed under the water. Now it's high time for us to now speak up and say, no, we can also compete with, the superpowers, and when we go head in head, whatever it is they can do, we can actually do better. So that's just it. So basically, there's not really much difference other than we are trying to go head in head and tell the world that yes, we can also be better, just like other superpowers. So that's it.
João?
Unfortunately, I don't know much about Afrofuturism. I have like kind of a surface level understanding of it, but I know that Afrofuturism has a decades-long story. Maybe we can date it back to the 50s or the 60s, maybe. So it really had time to develop its theoretical basis in a sense. And of course, many people, me included, just heard about Afrofuturism when that movie Black Panther came out on the cinemas, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Amazofuturism is something way more recent. I developed it back in 2019. At first because of my for personal reasons, I was kind of trying to reclaim my identity, first as a native to the northern region of Brazil, and after that as an indigenous person. and I wanted to develop another perspective within sci-fi, because it's still heavily dominated by narratives that center around Europe, United States, Asia, and mostly it shows white people or Asian people, and people from the third world countries of the global South are mainly seen as the other, as something exotic and strange and weird in a sense, As Damilola said, both genres, have at its center marginalized people, so they're really narratives about the periphery of the global North, in a sense, people that are in the edges of society, and they are now finding their voices, and develop narratives that break the mold of what we usually see in a sci-fi.
Renan, do you have anything to add?
Yes, actually, I don't feel much qualified to speak about Amazon futurism or Afrofuturism, because Amazon futurism in particular is, João already explained it very well about it. And but I like to add that I am from Rio de Janeiro, and not many people from the outside of Brazil have that notion, but Brazil is huge. And so I'm from the southeastern region of Brazil that is historically more privileged than the other regions of Brazil. And I think that the movements that arise in other parts of Brazil are much more significant than the things that that happen in the southeastern part of Brazil, because I think that here in Rio de Janeiro or São Paulo, for example, we tend to, I'm not sure if the word would be imitate, but we tell stories that are much similar to the things that are done in the United States or the Anglophone world. So I think that subgenres like Amazon futurism or solarpunk, that is another subgenre, and Brazilian subgenre, have a lot more to say than other recreations of cyberpunk or dystopias or things that we've seen already too much. And that's what I have to say about it.
Just to add on what Renan said, there's another movement, sci-fi movement within Brazil that started a couple of years ago that's called Sertão Punk. Sertão is something akin to, how can I say, maybe some kind of, it's a particular ecosystem here in Brazil, but it's something near
maybe drylands.
Yeah, drylands. That's the right word for that, And it's a counter narrative to usually negative portrayals of people that live in the northeastern region of Brazil. They're always depicted as poor and wild in a sense, and Sertão Punk came to to create positive narratives about the different cultures in each state of the northeastern region. And just to add something about the massive futurism, when it started, it was something that was almost similar to or synonymous to indigenous futurism. Of course, focus on Brazilian indigenous peoples. But as the years went by and I started talking with other people, I think massive futurism would be better described as regional futurism, because the Amazon is a universe in itself, and there are many different cultures within it. People that live in the city, there are indigenous peoples, there live in the woods, but there are also like quilombos. There are communities of descendants of runaway slaves. There are future all around Brazil, and there are many other cultures within the Amazon. So Futurism can be, how can I say that, can have many narratives, different narratives, not only pertaining to indigenous peoples, but other cultures as well.
How do these emerging subgenres relate to climate fiction, in your opinions?
Okay, so I think one way in which we can tie them together is this, right? We live in a place where we suffer climate disaster, right? Because of our technologies, because of our resources, right? For example, in Nigeria, we have, we are rich in fuel, crude oil to be precise, and then because of that, the sea, the lake, the rivers have suffered a lot, right? Fishes dying. I remember sometimes, and perhaps 3, 4, 5 years, if I'm sure, we had a whale, like a whale literally died on the beach. It's somewhere in Bayelsa State, somewhere in the southern region. And rather than look for a way to, save the poor whale, people began to cut heavy chunks of meat, right, from this. So we as writers, we as activists in this genre, it's very, very important that we tell people that the climate, the environment must be saved. I see the environment as a person, right, rather than a thing. If you sweep your environment well, what that means is that there'll be less cockroaches, there'll be less bugs, there'll be less deaths. And in other words, you will not fall sick often, right? But if you treat your environment with laxity, right, you choose not to sweep, your gutters are filled with dirt, your garbages, your grasses are overgrown, and all of that. So all of this will now tell on your health. So the both are movement, right? I say Afrofuturism as well as Futurism as a movement which everyone has to, duly partake in. Else, look at last year, for example, we had COVID-19, right? COVID-19 came and the world was held to a standstill. Perhaps that was Mother Earth trying to pass a message across to us that we should treat our home with care, right? We shouldn't just dump garbages, dump stuff the way we want. So the two are actually both movements, which everyone, be it the writer, be it whatever trade you are in, is something that you should hold well and tell others that Futurism, climate change is something that is, it concerns all of us, right? Because when you fail to do your part, it affects the person closest to you. So,
Renan, João.
I don't think I have anything to add about that.
João, anything?
Okay. Well, there were 3 main elements that I used to create the concept of Futurism. First, of course, it was cyberpunk. That's something that I always liked. And then I found out about solarpunk, and I really identified myself with the movement. And then Brazilian indigenous people's cultures, So I mixed this in a pot, in a cauldron, and then Futurism came out. So because solarpunk is one of the main references, I've seen that solarpunk combines really well with the already existing culture of indigenous peoples here in Brazil and other parts of the world as well. That they have their, let's say, their narrative, or maybe their cultural narrative, is basically the antithesis of the current capitalist thinking, of infinite production and infinite profit. And indigenous peoples here in Brazil have a mentality of not seeing nature as a pile of resources that we can extract to transform into products, but they see it as sometimes as their mother, or that there is no separation between humans and nature, but humans are like a branch of the tree of nature itself. So it deserves respect, and anything bad that we do to it in the future, of course, it will come back to us, you know. So it really is an antithesis to the current narrative. And as we approach the consequences of our endless exploitation and the consequence of climate change, I think more people will see the wisdom that those millennial cultures of indigenous peoples have to offer.
Do you think there's anything unique about the climate fiction coming out of the global south as opposed to climate fiction coming out of places like Europe and North America? If so, what? To me, when it yeah,
you can go.
all right, so when it comes to what I've seen of climate fiction from the MENA, in our politics, we don't have climate change denial. Usually the way it works in the US is that the right wingers, they deny climate change even exists, and the left wingers, they're on board with trying to fix the climate. But in the Middle East, there is no climate change denial. The way our governments are organized and the way politics is organized, everyone across the board is in agreement that climate change is a problem and has to be dealt with. It's more about corruption and fighting the corruption of, you know, capitalists who try and prevent any climate change action because it'll hurt their bottom line. I'm curious to see what you think too, Renan.
And so when I think about solarpunk or climate fiction in Brazil and in the global south in general, I think about lack of resources and lack of funding in science, and also many innovations regarding fighting climate catastrophe being imported and enjoyed only by the elites. And I think those elements are usually present in CliFi or from the global south in general, meaning that we have cool ideas to deal with the climate crisis. We have a lot of minds, a lot of great people here prepared to deal with the climate crisis, but we don't have enough resources or political power to put them into practice. And for example, earlier this year, here in the state of Rio de Janeiro, we have a city called Petrópolis that suffered a major climate catastrophe, and it's still struggling to recover. It happened in February, and this recovery process, I think that will probably take years. And what happened there was very similar to the catastrophes that happened in Germany and Belgium in 2021. But those cities have far more resources or political power to recover. And so what I see is that Petrópolis is still many years from totally recovering, if it will one day fully recover. And just to add as a note, it's one of the wealthiest cities here in the state of Rio de Janeiro. So things are far more worse far worse in other places. And there is a list of themes that I think are stronger in climate fiction coming from the global south. And one of them is that I think that the global south is often portrayed like the source of climate migrations, for example, because I think that most migrations will come from the south to the north because things will be harsher here, will be worse here. So people will come out from here to the most privileged countries. And another theme that I see and that is stronger in climate fiction from the global south is devising solutions with not many resources, and also how to deal with clusters of intermeshed problems and find solutions for them. Like how would be a country that has to deal with poverty and climate collapse and political opportunism all at the same time. And I also think that resilience from indigenous populations is a theme that I see often in climate fiction from the global south, and that I wouldn't see so much as in European stories, for example. And being realistic, a bit realistic, I see less eco-villages in the global south and more camps for people planning to leave or planning to recover from a disaster. So that might seem like a negative perspective, but it's a kind of a realist one. And I think that's it.
João Damilola, anything to add?
Okay, so just to add to what Renan said, one very strong point, right, that one can talk about when it comes to clarifying the global south, the fact that stories that you can find, okay, from these regions are told by people that are affected by them, right? I mean, I think it would be disastrous for someone who is not from the global south, right, to tell me what flood is, right? I've experienced flood, say 2-3 times, right? I think there was a time I actually fell into a gutter, had breeze on my knee. So when I want to tell such a story, right, I am in the best position to actually narrate what that means. So unlike those from the global north, right, I don't know if they experience that much of a climate disaster as we do in the global south. But for every story that is being told from authors or artists from the global south, it actually means that they've either been involved directly or indirectly. Perhaps they have a family member who was involved in it, right? Back in 2019, right, I went for my youth service. We have this thing called NYC Nigeria. It's a compulsory 1-year service to the government and all of that. So I experienced flood, right? Our lodge was blocked. Okay, water rose to say my knee level. Okay, my foodstuff, my bed, my books, everything was damaged by water, right? All of this you find in my story. All we have left is ourselves. So one very strong point from authors from the global south is that they tell their own stories, right? I can tell you categorically that for every story that's been written from the global south, I can say about 50% of those stories are non-fiction, right? The author just tried to, add some extra words to it to make it a bit longer. But more of the stories, the authors have experienced them. So I can say originality, right? Compared to dystopian fiction of the climate side, more authors from the global south tell the story the way it is, right? We don't cloak our words, we say it the way it is, and that's a very strong point. I think it's coming from authors from the global south.
Yeah. I'm not really knowledgeable about climate fiction, especially literature. I don't read many of the works that are coming out, so maybe I may do a commentary that is actually wrong. But I think that the United States and many countries of the global north are like walled gardens in a sense. You know, the most people that, and even if they are not a middle class, they have a major comforts in their life. They are not come as close as the reality of people that live in the global south, you know. So for decades, people in the global south have been suffering the consequences of climate change, of course, but you know, the chess table that's international politics and the United States and countries for Europe meddling in the affairs of developing nations for their own interests, you know. So at the root of anyone that creates art that's political, it's almost impossible to have to not have a different perspective than the works of fiction of people from the global north, you know. For example, you know, Renan's from Rio, and I think that he may agree that Rio and São Paulo are basically already cyberpunk realities, you know, the great disparity of wealth and how people that live in the slums and in the periphery of the cities have to improvise with technology to, you know, trying to have some kind of good life, you know. And now, right now, you know, there are people trying to build solarpunk realities, you know. Of course, they don't call it solarpunk, but they're trying to create communities and try to stir the ship of Brazil in a sense to respect nature and to stop destroying the rainforest and other things. And they are actually clashing with this cyberpunk reality that's our government right now, you know. Just in the last month, there's been an uprising in the killings of indigenous peoples. So people that are fighting for the preservation of nature are being killed essentially for profit, you know, because people want forests to become pastures and, you know, to produce meat or to chop down wood and things like that. So it's as I said before, you know, as anyone that creates some art that has some link to the political in the global south, they will have a very different perspective, you know, from the other works of fiction that come from the global north.
So art, aesthetics, and visual storytelling play a really important role in all the subgenres we discussed that are in a way interrelated with climate fiction. I was wondering if there's something unique about the role of art in these genres as opposed to storytelling and writing. What are your thoughts on it, guys?
Okay, so unlike writing, I find art so appealing, right? It speaks to the heart, right? It evokes a lot of emotions. So when I see an art that you know, is inclined towards climate fiction or solarpunk, I'm always interested in it. Okay, so I think one of the main role art to play in this aspect is that it just, you know, pictures a future where we can live happily with the environment, right? A future where the environment does not have to fight back because we have actually done our part to keep it clean. So art is actually very, very important, right? I don't think there's any story or movie that does not have a cover. So people are actually more interested in seeing the cover, right? What is behind this art? I mean, a person draws a community, green flowers, clean water, you know, the windmill, all the technologies are not, you know, counteracting with the environment, right? Everything is biodegradable, renewable source and all of that. So arts tend to speak to us, the emotions it evokes are quite deep, right? So I think one of the main importance of art in this aspect is that it speaks to our emotions, right? For a person like me, I think art is one of my most, greatest inspiration before I write. When I just see an art that I like, it tends to speak so much to me. So art tends to speak to our emotions, right? Invokes a lot. Saying that in this aspect, you can actually create, you can visualize the world. I think that's the word. It helps us to visualize the world that we are yet to be, a world that is clean for us and us alone.
About art and climate fiction. When we think about cyberpunk, for example, we immediately think of an aesthetics like Blade Runner or words like that with tall buildings and packed cities full of people and cool technology. So cyberpunk has its aesthetics already consolidated. But I think solarpunk and climate fiction or even Afrofuturism are still consolidating its imagery. And I think that digital art and 3D art, paintings, and that kind of stuff is essential for this. And since solarpunk, for example, is a genre really tied to activism and the real fight against climate catastrophe, the practical fight. And so I think that art is important because, for example, if you arrive in an exposition and you see images, paintings, sculptures, or visual arts in general, you have that impact in seconds. You see something and then you feel something almost immediately. And a movie, a book, or storytelling in general requires a longer digestion. You need to experience that in a prolonged amount of time. So visual arts in general have that immediate impact that I think that can be tied to the role of activism and the fight against climate collapse. So I think that's really important that we have lots of artists producing lots of stuff to help us visualize those better words, those semi-utopian or utopian realities, and different from what we have now.
I think that if we want any kind of political movement that's based, let's say, in the solarpunk tenets, first we need to, we must be able to imagine the possibilities first, because if we don't have like a north to guide us, or better yet, we don't have a south, since we're talking about global south. If we don't have a south to guide us, we will just ramble around, we'll get lost in the way. And I think the imagination and those cultural artifacts that we see in movies and art and books and things like that are these elements that help us develop political movements, So cyberpunk had its, let's say, its utility back in the 70s and the 80s, because it was talking about a kind of far future, a far reality where corporations take over, right? So it completed its task as a dystopian work, because it worked with our emotions and especially anxiety and fear of the kind of future that we might have, and that unfortunately we have right now in many parts of the world. So I think dystopia and utopia have they have complementary functions. You know, dystopia, it's kind of hell, and utopia is kind of heaven. You know, so there's something that we want to avoid, and there's something that we want to go towards, right? So to work with imagination, and for that to become a political movement, we have, as artists, we have to basically, you know, work with people's emotions, right? People have to feel something. How many actions we take because we feel something, how many things we avoid because we're feeling some kind of thing, you know. So as Renan said before, visual storytelling, visual art is something way more immediate, right? So you see it and you already know what it's about. So I think it's something very useful to spread the concepts of solarpunk to the masses, right? But you know, literary works, because we have to take some time to digest every information, something that is not as immediate, but I think it captivates way more than the visual art, in my opinion. You know, I may be wrong, because you know there's this all this involvement that we have with the story and the characters. So when we end the book, those characters in their lives become part of us, right? And yeah, that's basically it. You know, for example, before the French Revolution, you know, how many works of philosophy and also literary works had to slowly seep into people's imaginations, so that after decades of this kind of work, people were claiming for this new social reality, right? And with the internet right now, we don't have to wait like 100 or 150 years for these things to take effect. You know, solarpunk already grew a lot in the last 5 years, right? But we still don't have a major work that you know, that everyone knows about, like for example Blade Runner for cyberpunk, you know. So maybe if we have, you know, some kind of major game or some kind of major movie that delivers the solarpunk message, then after some time when we start to see way more political movement towards you know, trying to fight against climate change and developing a better future for us.
Recently there's been an uptick in solarpunk media. So has anyone seen the recent Doctor Strange? One of the multiverses portrayed in it could be interpreted as a solarpunk utopia. And I think in the coming years, we're going to see this genre pop up more and more in fiction, not just literature, but more mainstream fiction like video games or movies. And I think when we do finally have that defining work that everyone can band around and completely understand the genre just by watching it, I think there will be a proliferation, and it's really important to have something visually represented because it's more accessible. Not only is it more palatable, it's easier for someone to take in a portrait of climate disaster than for someone to sit there and explain to another person, okay, so when the climate disaster happens, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. If you just show them an image, they'll understand it. And one problem in the global south I've seen, this might be just relegated to the MENA, but illiteracy rates here are high. Like, they're not astronomical, but they're higher than in other places. So you can't really have media to engage people with on that level that requires a high literacy rate, or something that is too complex for the average man to understand here. You need something like art where you just look at it and you get it. I think that's one of the reasons why it was easy for them to teach us in school at a young age why about the environmental disaster that's going to happen, is because at first they tried to explain it to us, and then we didn't really care as kids. But then they would show us videos or images or pictures or snapshots of just whatever is going to happen if we continue to pollute. And I think within my generation, in that time span, we have now the younger generations, all of them are all on board with saving the environment. And even the older generation that was in doubt about it, I think now they're all there's a homogeneity. They're all in agreement that it is happening. It's happening right now, and we need to do something about it. So since we're almost done with the panel, we have 8 minutes left. I was wondering if there were any climate fiction authors, filmmakers, video game makers, or authors, filmmakers, and makers of other kinds, or illustrators even in one of the subgenres we talked about from the Global South that you'd like to recommend. Like any artists you're familiar with from the Global South who work in these genres that you think deserve more attention, that you think their work should be looked at.
Well, you caught me by surprise. I'm trying to think about someone and try to, use this space to show people other works of great arts, but nothing comes to mind right now. So let me have some moments to see if anyone comes to mind.
I can mention. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but from Nigeria, Damilola perhaps might correct me, but Santo Ihezui, I think he writes some climate fiction stuff that is really great. And from Brazil, I can think of Tony Moraes and Raquel Setz. I know they write some stuff, some solarpunk stuff. There's also Fabio Fernandes, who I know that has a few stories regarding climate fiction. And
anything from the related subgenres, like solarpunk, that kind of stuff that you'd recommend?
Yes, from certain punk, for example, there's GG Denise, and perhaps João has more names from Amazon Futurism, but he's a great illustrator. I don't know if you checked already his website, but I can recommend João as a great Amazon Futurist illustrator. And I'm trying to think of others, but I'll let you know.
Okay, so I think I know of about 3 to 4 authors in Nigeria who delve into this kind of work. So there's Osaho, right? Osaho Izeyamu. He wrote a story in the Reckoning Press issue 3 titled More Sea Than Tar, right? So he painted in that story the danger of flood. Okay, when you allow flood to rise beyond its horizon, what are those consequences that we tend to suffer? And this Donald, it was a panelist earlier today. He also talked about the toxicity of the air, right? What happens when the air is bad? What happens when we can no longer breathe good air? What do we stand to face? And also there's innocence. This innocence, Ilo Chizaram, yes, yeah. He also has a story in Reckoning Press. I think we should too. There's some too also, like Renan said. So I think those are the guys that are basically right keen on it when it comes to solarpunk, utopian work and everything in between.
Well, maybe I can recommend Rogério Pietro. He's a guy that wrote a book called Mesofuturism. I think his was the first literary work of the genre. And there are some other people of certain punk as well. Renan mentioned Gigi. What's her name again?
Gigi Diniz.
Gigi Diniz. I think there's another author called Alain Gissa, maybe, or I think it's Alain. Sorry guys, I can't really remember their names right now. But if you look for Mesofuturism, of course you find my visual works, but you also find some books in the genre. You can search for Certain Punk. That's SERTAO punk. Maybe if something comes up. And yeah, and thanks Renan for talking about my work.
You're welcome.
So one of our listeners asked, can you please put in the chat the works you have written or anything you've worked on as an introduction? You can mention it now on the call. We still have around 3 minutes. If you'd like to introduce yourselves. I know we should have done that at the beginning, but there was a whole mishap.
Let's introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is João Queiroz. I'm a Brazilian illustrator. I come from Rondônia, which is a state in the northern region of Brazil. So that had some influence in my work. And in 2019, I came up with the concept of the Mesofuturism through my illustrations. And to my surprise, that became a kind of art movement in Brazil. That's something that's still growing, but I'm really happy to see it spread, no matter how slowly it is. And you can check my works on Instagram and ArtStation and Twitter. My nickname is kind of hard, but it's Q1R0Z. I may put a link here in the chat for you guys to check it out. And yeah, thanks for having me here.
It was a pleasure. Renan Bernardo.
Okay, so okay, Renan, go first.
Okay, so my name is Renan Bernardo. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, and I have stories in Apex Magazine, Solarpunk Magazine, and Escape Pod, and other places. And I was one of the authors selected for the 2021 Imagine 22,000 Climate Fiction Contest. And I'm published in multiple languages like German, Italian, Japanese, and Portuguese. And that's it.
Okay, so my name is Oyedotun Damilola. I'm a Nigerian. I'm from the Yoruba origin of southwestern parts. And I have series in Reckoning Press. Okay, all we have left is ourselves. That story one was a winner in the Pen Down American Writers Prize for Emerging Writers. It's also shortlisted in the first annual Utopian Awards that will be announced later tonight. Have story in Clark's World, forthcoming in Lightspeed, Omenana. Yeah, I think that's Science Fiction World China. So yeah, that's it.
As for me, I'm JD or JD Harlock. I'm the poetry editor at Solarpunk magazine. I've been published in Strange Horizons, Starline, The Future Fire, and Mythila Review. Thank you all for joining me today. It was a pleasure. I loved hearing what you all had to say. we're done. We're actually a minute late, but I'm glad we managed to tackle everything that I had listed in my notes. Thank you all again, and thank you. And I hope we can do this again next year. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to meet you all, Renan, JD, Damilola. Hope we talking.
Yes, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.